Jung's most unsettling revelation wasn't about controlling anger, it was about people who never get angry, and why this immunity makes them nearly untouchable psychologically. In his clinical work, Jung observed a rare type of patient with what he called emotional impermeability, individuals who remained entirely calm when insulted, unaffected by criticism, and immune to provocation. They never took things personally, never got defensive, and seemed untouched by the emotional triggers that ruled everyone else. What disturbed Jung wasn't repression or emotional detachment. These people hadn't learned to suppress feelings. They had undergone a deep psychological transformation that rendered other people's behavior irrelevant to their inner state, giving them an almost supernatural form of emotional freedom. Today, I'll walk you through Jung's most disturbing discovery about people who never get angry, and the psychological process he believed could make anyone completely unbothered by others' actions. The revelation began with a case Jung documented in his private notes. His patient, a successful businessman named Heinrich, came to him in 1919, not because he was suffering, but because his complete lack of emotional reaction was making everyone around him uneasy. Heinrich had built a steel empire in post-war Germany, but his employees feared him, not for cruelty or rage, but for his eerie calm. Nothing could provoke him. Insults slid off. Criticism sparked curiosity, not defensiveness. Even betrayal fascinated him more than it hurt him. His wife was the one who insisted he see Jung. "Doctor," she said, "my husband doesn't get upset about anything. Yesterday, I confessed I'd been having an affair for 6 months. He asked me 3 questions. Was I happy, did I need anything from him, and whether I wanted to continue our marriage or end it." But Jung soon realized Heinrich wasn't emotionally numb. He wasn't suppressing or avoiding anything. He had simply learned to view his triggers as mirrors reflecting aspects of himself he hadn't yet faced. Jung called this the shadow mirror effect. Every person who angers you reveals something about your unconscious mind. The rude coworker who dismisses your ideas reflects your fear of inadequacy. The friend who's always late mirrors your need for control. The family member who criticizes you exposes your own self-doubt. Heinrich mastered this principle after a crushing betrayal 3 years earlier, when his closest business partner stole his biggest client and nearly destroyed his company. Instead of seeking revenge, Heinrich asked himself one question: what part of me is this person reflecting? The answer stunned him. His partner's greed revealed Heinrich's buried fear of poverty. His dishonesty mirrored Heinrich's habit of hiding his true feelings. The betrayal itself showed him his own capacity for selfishness. By confronting these shadow aspects instead of projecting them outward, Heinrich achieved what Jung described as psychological immunity. He learned to see people's behavior as information about them, not as attacks on him. Jung formalized this insight into what he called the shadow integration protocol. When someone triggers you, instead of reacting, ask 3 questions. What trait in this person am I judging most harshly? Where do I show this same trait, even subtly? What is this trigger trying to teach me about myself? Take Sarah, a marketing manager constantly irritated by her co-worker Tom's interruptions. Using Jung's method, she asked, "What am I judging in Tom?" His need for attention. Then, where do I do this? She realized she often dominated conversations when she felt insecure. What is this teaching me? That her frustration with Tom reflected her own attention-seeking tendencies. Once Sarah accepted this part of herself, Tom's interruptions stopped bothering her. She saw them as his insecurity, not a threat to her worth. That's the essence of the shadow mirror. It transforms your triggers into teachers. But Jung's research uncovered something even deeper and more unsettling. People who reached this level of emotional impermeability had entered a psychological space that most humans never experience. The gap between stimulus and response. Heinrich described this gap to Jung. "Doctor, when someone insults me, I feel something strange. Time seemed to slow down." Heinrich described it as if he could see the words coming toward him, but instead of striking him, they simply hovered in the air. "In that moment," he said, "I have a choice. Do I catch these words and make them mine, or do I let them pass through me?" Jung realized Heinrich had discovered what he called the reaction gap, a psychological space where conscious choice replaces automatic reaction. For most people, trigger and response happen as one seamless event. But those with emotional impermeability had learned to insert awareness into that space, to choose their reaction rather than be controlled by it. This insight challenged everything psychology believed about human behavior. It was long assumed that anger was involuntary, that emotional triggers inevitably produced emotional reactions. Yet Jung's patience proved that with deliberate practice, anyone could access this gap and consciously decide how to respond. The method Jung developed to teach this was deceptively simple yet profoundly transformative. He called it the observer protocol. When triggered, instead of reacting instantly, you mentally step back and observe the situation as if watching a film. You notice the other person's tone, their expression, their emotion, but most importantly, you observe your own internal response without becoming it. Jung documented numerous cases of people mastering this skill. Maria, a teacher, learned to observe her principal's criticism without taking it personally. Rather than defend herself, she could see his stress, his anxiety about the school board, his own insecurities. From this detached observer position, she was able to respond with empathy instead of anger. The essential realization Jung uncovered was this: you are not your emotions. You are the awareness that observes them. When someone provokes you, that surge of anger is simply information, not your identity. You can examine it, act on it, or let it drift by. Heinrich had internalized this principle so completely that he described feeling psychologically transparent. Other people's negativity moved through him like light through glass. He wasn't suppressing or denying anything. He simply refused to identify with every emotional impulse that arose within him. But Jung also found something deeply unsettling about this state. Once individuals developed such awareness, they often lost interest in the emotional dramas that absorbed most people. They no longer cared about being right, winning debates, or proving their worth. This made them profoundly centered, yet often isolated from those still trapped in habitual reactivity. The observer protocol required consistent practice, but Jung discovered that most people could begin accessing the reaction gap within just a few weeks. It followed 3 deliberate steps. Pause when triggered and take a conscious breath. Observe both the trigger and your internal response without judgment. Choose your next action according to your values, not your impulses. This practice wasn't about becoming cold or emotionless. It was about reclaiming authorship over your reactions, choosing to respond from awareness rather than habit. Through studying emotionally immune individuals, Jung noticed another striking pattern. They had constructed what he called boundary fortresses around their psychological space. These weren't physical defenses, but invisible filters that decided what could, and could not, influence their inner world. Heinrich explained his own boundary fortress to Jung. "Doctor, I learned that people can only disturb my peace if I allow them to. Their words, their emotions, these are external events. They only become internal experiences when I choose to take them in." This realization revolutionized Jung's understanding of the human psyche. Most people, he realized, have completely porous psychological boundaries. They absorb others' emotions, inherit their stress, and let external chaos dictate their internal equilibrium. By contrast, those with emotional impermeability had learned to build selective barriers. Jung identified 3 main types of boundaries among such individuals. The relevance filter: they absorbed only what served their growth or goals, acknowledging but not internalizing the rest. The ownership boundary: they could clearly separate their emotions from others. When someone was angry, they saw it as that person's anger, not their own. The identity fortress: their sense of self was so grounded that external criticism couldn't shake it. They could receive feedback without hearing it as an attack on their worth. But even this remarkable strength, Jung found, concealed something darker, something deeply disturbing about these boundaries. People who built such boundaries often became magnets for those who lacked them. Toxic personalities, emotional vampires, and unstable individuals were naturally drawn to people with strong inner stability, because those boundaries provided the calm and order their chaotic minds craved. Heinrich experienced this constantly. "Doctor," he told Jung, "ever since I stopped reacting to provocation, people seem to work even harder to provoke me. It's as if my calm unsettles them more than anger ever could." Jung soon understood why. Emotionally reactive people rely on others' reactions to regulate their own emotional state. When Heinrich refused to supply that emotional feedback, it forced them to confront their own instability, something most people avoid at all costs. To help others develop this inner stability, Jung created what he called the boundary fortress technique, built on 3 strategic elements. The emotional firewall. Before entering any social situation, you consciously decide which emotions you're open to experiencing and which you'll simply observe without absorbing. Response selection. You predetermine how you'll handle common triggers so you're not reacting impulsively but following a value-based script. The identity anchor. You maintain a clear, unshakable sense of who you are, so external opinions become information, not threats. Here's how this works in practice. David, a software engineer, was constantly stressed by his demanding boss. Applying Jung's boundary fortress method, David began setting an emotional firewall each morning before work. He chose to observe his boss's stress without absorbing it. He also pre-selected calm, professional responses to criticism and anchored his identity in his competence and growth, not in his boss's approval. Within weeks, David reported feeling almost untouchable at work. His boss's moods no longer affected his peace or performance. More surprisingly, his boss started treating him with newfound respect, as if sensing David's psychological strength. This illustrated a paradox Jung often noted: the stronger your boundaries, the more others respect them. People intuitively sense psychological power, and when they do, they adapt their behavior accordingly. But Jung's most unsettling discovery about emotional impermeability came from a deeper phenomenon he termed projection reversal. His emotionally immune patients had developed the ability to see through others' attacks, straight into the psychological wounds behind them. Heinrich demonstrated this insight during one of Jung's sessions. A business rival had publicly accused him of being a heartless profiteer who cares nothing for his workers. Instead of feeling anger or defensiveness, Heinrich felt only curiosity. "Doctor," he said, "that man's words told me everything about his mind, and nothing about mine." His accusation of heartlessness revealed his fear of being seen as unfeeling. His obsession with profit showed his own insecurity about money. And his talk of compassion for workers exposed his guilt over how he treats his employees. Jung realized Heinrich had achieved what he called psychological X-ray vision, the ability to see beneath surface hostility and recognize the hidden pain driving it. Whenever someone attacks you, Jung concluded, they're really revealing something about themselves, not about you. This insight was profoundly disturbing because it suggested that most human conflict isn't personal at all. It's built on projection, people unconsciously fighting their own unresolved issues, reflected in others. Jung saw this pattern everywhere. Criticism of your appearance often comes from someone insecure about their own looks. Attacks on your success arise from people dissatisfied with their achievements. Harsh judgments about your choices usually stem from others' doubts about their own decisions. But the most troubling realization was what happened once you began seeing these projections clearly. It became almost impossible to take personal attacks personally. Instead of anger, you started feeling compassion for the pain behind them. Heinrich described this transformation perfectly. "Doctor, when someone attacks me now, I see a wounded child striking out in pain. How could I be angry at a child for crying? Instead, I feel curiosity. I wonder what hurt them and whether they can be healed." That, Jung concluded, is the ultimate form of psychological immunity. Jung discovered that when you learn to interpret others' attacks as expressions of their pain rather than reflections of your worth, their behavior loses all power over you. You become completely unbothered. He formalized this insight into what he called the projection reversal technique, which relied on 3 diagnostic questions. When someone attacks me, what specific quality are they targeting? Where might they struggle with this same quality in themselves? What pain or fear could be driving their attack? Here's how this works in practice. Lisa, a graphic designer, was crushed when a client harshly told her that her work was unprofessional and amateur. Applying projection reversal, she began by asking, "What quality are they attacking?" "My professionalism." Then she wondered, where might they struggle with this? She remembered the client once admitting they often felt like an imposter in their industry. Finally, she asked, "What pain drives this?" Perhaps the fear of their own unprofessionalism being exposed. With that realization, Lisa's entire perspective shifted. The client's attack was no longer personal. It was a mirror of their own insecurity. Instead of reacting defensively, she calmly addressed their concerns while keeping her inner peace intact. But Jung also warned that this level of insight came with a dangerous side effect. Once you begin to see through everyone's psychological defenses, genuine relationships can become difficult. You might start to feel as though you're surrounded not by mature adults, but by wounded children acting out their unresolved pain. Heinrich experienced this firsthand. "Doctor," he told Jung, "sometimes I feel like the only adult in a world full of hurt children. I see everyone's pain so clearly that I can't take their behavior seriously anymore." Jung realized that this was the price of psychological immunity, an unsettling clarity about human nature that could easily turn into detachment from human connection. The challenge, he concluded, was to recognize others' pain without losing compassion for it. Yet Jung's final discovery about emotional impermeability went even further, and it was the most disturbing of all. His patients hadn't simply learned to remain untriggered, they had mastered what he called emotional alchemy, the art of transforming every trigger into psychological gold. Heinrich described the process like this: "Doctor, I no longer see difficult people as problems to avoid. I see them as teachers, bringing me exactly the lessons I need for my growth. The more someone can trigger me, the more valuable they are to my development." This represented a complete reversal of ordinary human psychology. Instead of avoiding conflict or emotional discomfort, Heinrich welcomed it. Instead of viewing difficult people as enemies, he saw them as unconscious allies in his own evolution. Jung recognized this as the final stage of emotional impermeability, a point where every external challenge becomes a tool for inner advancement. His emotionally immune patients had learned to use negativity as raw material for transformation. Heinrich explained that his process was systematic. Whenever he felt triggered, he didn't simply observe or suppress the feeling. He immediately asked himself, "What is this person teaching me about myself? What weakness are they exposing that I need to strengthen? What shadow aspect are they forcing me to confront?" This was psychological transmutation, turning pain into wisdom, conflict into clarity. But Jung found this realization profoundly unsettling. Individuals who reached this level of development became nearly impossible to manipulate, control, or emotionally defeat. They had turned every potential weakness into a source of inner strength. Deep down, you already sense this truth. External validation cannot inflate you because you don't depend on it, and external criticism cannot deflate you because you transform it into growth. You already hold the capacity to become emotionally invulnerable, not by building walls, but through the alchemy of transforming every challenge into wisdom. Jung called this process emotional alchemy, and it unfolded through three key stages of transformation. Trigger mining, actively extracting insights from every person or situation that disturbs your peace. Shadow integration, using others' behavior to identify, confront, and heal your own psychological wounds. Strength synthesis, turning each discovered weakness into a developed strength. Let's see how this works in practice. Marcus, a sales manager, constantly felt triggered by his team's laziness and endless excuses. But instead of just managing his frustration, he decided to apply emotional alchemy. He asked himself, "What is their laziness teaching me? That I expect others to share my drive without understanding their motivations. What weakness does this reveal? My inability to inspire rather than demand. What strength can I build from this?" The skill of motivating others through connection instead of pressure. Marcus transformed what once irritated him into a source of growth. He began studying motivation psychology, learned to align with his team's personal goals, and evolved into one of the company's most respected leaders. The very trigger that once drained him became the catalyst for his greatest professional development. Yet Jung also warned of the dark side of emotional alchemy. Those who mastered it could become so focused on self-development that they lost empathy for others, still learning basic emotional regulation. They risked becoming psychologically superior, insightful, but detached. Heinrich knew this struggle well. "Doctor," he confessed, "sometimes I feel like I'm running a psychology experiment instead of living a human life. Every interaction becomes a study of human nature rather than a real connection." Jung realized that this was the final challenge of emotional impermeability, maintaining one's humanity while transcending ordinary reactivity. The goal, he said, wasn't to become invulnerable, but anti-fragile, to grow stronger and more compassionate through every difficulty. As Jung wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." True emotional immunity required accepting both strength and vulnerability, the light and the shadow within. The highest form of emotional alchemy, Jung concluded, was what he called compassionate immunity, using your psychological strength not to distance yourself, but to uplift others. Heinrich eventually learned this. He began using his emotional stability not as a shield, but as a bridge, helping others build resilience rather than merely protecting his own peace. Jung's final observations revealed the ultimate purpose of emotional impermeability, not to escape human connection, but to engage with it from a position of calm, grounded strength. He called this final stage the compassionate warrior, someone who can remain untriggered yet care deeply, who can face human suffering without being consumed by it. Heinrich's transformation into a compassionate warrior unfolded gradually. At first, his emotional steadiness made others uncomfortable. His calm seemed distant, almost inhuman. But Jung guided him to understand that true immunity also means creating safety for others to feel what they feel. "Doctor," Heinrich reflected, "I realized my immunity was incomplete if it only protected me. True strength means creating space for others to experience their emotions without judgment, while I remain centered in mine." Jung recorded how Heinrich ultimately learned to use his emotional immunity in service of others, transforming his self-mastery into a quiet force of healing for those around him. When Heinrich's wife expressed frustration, he no longer withdrew into cold detachment. Instead, he held space for her emotions, fully present, yet untouched by their intensity. When his employees brought him problems, he listened deeply without absorbing their stress. This, Jung realized, was the paradox of ultimate emotional immunity. It doesn't come from rising above humanity, but from embodying it completely. The compassionate warrior can feel another's pain without suffering, witness chaos without becoming chaotic, and offer support without becoming drained. From Jung's observations emerged a powerful technique, emotional aikido, the art of redirecting emotional energy for healing rather than resistance. When someone brings you anger, you channel it toward solutions. When someone brings you sadness, you transform it into compassion. When someone brings you fear, you alchemize it into wisdom. Heinrich mastered this so completely that people began seeking him out during their darkest emotional storms. His very presence calmed others, not because he was detached, but because he had achieved emotional mastery, feeling everything, yet being controlled by nothing. Jung's final notes on Heinrich revealed the deepest secret of emotional impermeability. He had learned to love humanity fully while remaining untouchable by its chaos. This, Jung believed, was the highest achievement of human psychology. Complete vulnerability intertwined with complete invulnerability. The businessman who once couldn't be bothered became Jung's most profound case study in human potential. Heinrich proved that emotional immunity isn't about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming so internally strong that you can remain warm, grounded, and compassionate even in the midst of others' storms. Jung's disturbing discovery about people who never get angry revealed something extraordinary. We are not victims of our emotions. With the right understanding and practice, anyone can develop the inner strength that makes external behavior irrelevant to inner peace. Heinrich's path, from shadow integration, through boundary fortresses, projection reversal, and emotional alchemy, to finally embodying the compassionate warrior, represented what Jung saw as the complete journey of psychological evolution available to every human being. Today, you've walked through those same principles Jung uncovered in his private case studies. The shadow mirror, transforming triggers into teachers. The reaction gap, reclaiming choice over your responses. The boundary fortress, protecting your psychological space. The projection reversal, seeing through others' attacks. The emotional alchemy, turning every challenge into growth. And finally, the compassionate warrior, staying human while becoming immune. Jung's most unsettling realization wasn't that some people never get angry. It was that this calm revealed the vast psychological potential hidden within every human being. The question isn't whether you can develop emotional immunity. The question is whether you're ready to claim the power that already belongs to you. Remember Heinrich's final revelation. "Doctor, I learned that true strength isn't about what can't touch you. It's about what you can touch without being changed by it." Your journey toward emotional immunity begins now. Every trigger is a teacher. Every difficult person, a mirror. Every challenge, a chance for transformation. The only one who can disturb your peace is the version of yourself you haven't yet understood. Take Jung's disturbing discovery and make it your liberating truth. You have the power to never be bothered by anyone again. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.